Hi KRB teachers, welcome back to the Maximize Being the Best Version of Yourself webinar series. Today we are looking at parent boundary setting and how you can set clear parent or guardian communication. A reminder of the overview of the webinar series. And today we are starting with the first webinar in Module C, which is focused on your relationship with external people such as parents, teachers and colleagues. As you have done previously, I would ask that you please scan the QR code to answer some questions. This helps for us to understand and learn how your understanding for different topics has hopefully developed throughout the webinar series and helps us to improve for going forward for these webinar series for KRB. So I would ask that you scan the QR code and answer those questions at the end of this webinar today, please. So starting with the introduction, what are we hopefully learning about today? Today, I would like to help you to set clear expected methods of communications with parents and guardians of students. An outline of what today will look like. We'll start with the context and background as to why this is so important, and look at then 3 different strategies that you can use to help set boundaries with parents. Firstly, how you can relate to them and teach you about parenting styles. Secondly, how you can outsource and incorporate automated forms of communication. And thirdly, discuss and particularly look at two-way feedback and what would that look like. Starting with the context as to why we are looking at boundary setting for parents. A reminder that boundary setting is about implementing limits and constraints to safeguard emotional, physical, and mental well-being. And that is, of course, for you as teachers, but also can help with students and parents. This is often defined by what is acceptable and unacceptable in relationships with others. I would like to draw you to some research that's come out of Monash University a few years ago when they asked about various perceptions that teachers have of their work. Some of the quotes here were, all of these quotes were from teachers, and some of them, as you can see, are quite concerning. That there has been reports of abusive parents that are making teachers feel underappreciated. Parents can be unsupportive, unrealistic, disrespectful and demanding. They can emotionally abuse teachers. They tend to complain. Teachers' mental health can be failing as a result of the stress and the abuse. Disrespect to the point where teachers say, well, why bother? Despite various forms of communication, they still email you asking those mundane questions, which you're probably familiar with, unfortunately, which you've already communicated, and more abuse, verbal, physical, and then teachers are just expected to grin and bear it. So in addition to this, following on from COVID, we've obviously blurred the boundaries between your work life, but also your home life. So another reason why setting those boundaries and making them really clear is so important, to separate and differentiate between those different environments to give you a bit of space between the two. So we want to look at 3 different strategies today, and we have looked at these in previous webinars in relation to the way you manage classrooms and how you set these boundaries with students. But in applying this today to parents, we'll look at how you can relate and move towards parents, outsource, move outside, and then finally discuss and how you can actually move away. So firstly, relate. This strategy is about really moving towards to build genuine connections with parents, not just from a cushy, soft, that's nice to do strategy, but because it's got benefit for you to help properly understand and learn about parents and their students and their children and your students. So relating and moving towards parents is really about learning about them, being genuinely enthusiastic to know about them, their home life, what are their children like at home, acknowledging their concerns and giving them that validation, engaging in small talk to develop your personal relationship with them as well, which can be advantageous, listening actively, and including that humour and warmth that helps to build a more sustainable long-term relationship with them, given the future of the year ahead. The benefits of relating to parents is that you do become more approachable, and likewise, they become more approachable to you. Establishing that pre-existing relationship means that you can be more proactive um, in your dealings with them rather than reactive and only come to them with the bad news or when discipline or feedback has to happen. Eliciting more appropriate behaviour from them also empowers them to make them involved and included in the process of their child's education, which is advantageous from an academic standpoint as well. Developing more genuine connections and hopefully reducing that likelihood of abuse. We're much less likely to attack or abuse or complain to people that we have a genuine connection with. So all benefits to try and ultimately help you and help your own well-being. Looking at parenting styles can really help you to develop that at first stage being awareness. So if you know what they're like as parents, that can really help give you some insight into working out what's working or not working for potentially students in the classroom and why. So as we've looked at for teachers, there are predominantly 4 types of parenting styles: authoritarian, authoritative, uninvolved, and permissive. And these vary on a degree of control versus warmth. So looking similarly to the gold standard for teaching, is the gold standard for parenting is having that authoritative parenting style where there's a high degree of control that the parents have, but also that high warmth. So there'll be firm but fair and enforced rules, two-way conversations typically between parents and teachers, parents and their children, sorry, which is advantageous and positive relationship ultimately. The impact on students is that they do have higher self-esteem and confidence, better EQ or emotional quotient, and excellent social skills. Typically, we see also a higher academic achievement from those with an authoritative parenting style at home. On the flip side, we have authoritarian, which is also high control, but there's little warmth. So it's more focused on obedience, punishment, and tend to have quieter children. We also have permissive parenting styles, which is denoted by high warmth but low control. They don't tend to enforce rules. They can be very caring and empathetic towards their children, but ultimately the control sits with the child rather than the parent, which you may see overflow into the classroom too. And finally, the uninvolved parent is denoted by low warmth and low control. So typically they're more inattentive and not present. They don't provide much guidance at home, and the child does as they wish. We see self-esteem issues for the parenting styles, self-esteem issues in children with parents that have that lower warmth, particularly the authoritarian and uninvolved, and more directly impacting you potentially in terms of an academic lens is the low control parenting styles that are uninvolved and permissive, that can have a flow on effect to children from an academic standpoint. So ultimately, after we've related to them and understood parents and how they are and what their natural nature is with their children, your role can be involved in facilitating that authoritative parenting style. So that would look like asking questions to really understand what they do at home and why. Praising desired student behaviour, so giving that positive reinforcement, which we know is the best predictor of changing behaviour. Encouraging parents to really role model and think about and reflect on their own impact that they have on their children. Providing those parents with specific homework to help increase that level of control, particularly. Giving constructive feedback, and we'll look at that further in terms of the two-way feedback we discuss, but really suggesting ultimately open conversations that they can have with their children to elicit that greater degree of warmth. So I would ask that you please get out your worksheet now and write down some ideas as to how you can facilitate parents to adopt an authoritative parenting style. So moving on to the next strategy, which is outsource. And this is really moving outside of just that direct relationship between you and your parent, you and the parent, sorry. We've looked previously at how you can outsource for students to self-manage and problem solve themselves. So remember, we looked at how they can actually go through a little bit of a list before they come to you. So taking initiative, problem solving, asking friends, buddies, someone in the year above, etc. Similarly, we can help you to outsource and move outside in terms of your relationship with parents, and really outsourcing to adding in the student or their child in the process, but also helping parents to refer to other parents, particularly those in the same classroom, for instance, for the support or asking different questions that they may come to you and bombard you with. So, how can you outsource firstly to students? This is about encouraging students to really communicate with their parents regarding those important things that they can sometimes ask you about. So, telling them to make sure they remind parents and other interested guardians, for instance, about upcoming assessments, online logins, whether that be to Aspire or textbooks, things like excursions, extracurricular activities, anything and everything. The more that the more that the child communicates with their parents, the less likely they will be to come to you for all those mundane questions. You could also consider outsourcing to other parents. So, huge benefit in connecting parents to each other. That can increase their ability to rely on each other for support, answer each other's questions, but also share their concerns offline and independently away from you to add to it, which normally adds to your workload. Further to this, you can outsource essentially to technology, and you can automate those communications that you tend to have. The reason for this particular strategy is, of course, as we saw in the Monash University research before, that you can sometimes upload things to different places and email them, and they'll still come to email you about different things. So I'll show you how you can give them a really structured way to come to you only when they really need it. So do make the most of Aspire. At least that's a login that they're familiar with. That's something that's part of the KRB policy and tool that you use. So that would be a first point of call to direct them to. Something you may also want to consider is Class Dojo, which gives you the opportunity to upload communications that can be seen by either student and or parents regarding individual children or class-wide updates. Calendly also allows you to set up open up essentially meeting times that people can book directly in, so you don't have to go back and forth with this whole when are you available, when can we have a chat, etc. You can give them a link and they can directly book a time in or upload and direct them to a Zoom or whatever it is, or in person, or however you want to do it. But that's a great tool to consider. And then putting all of that together, and this I would suggest is the key strategy here, is setting up an auto reply which looks something like this. So thanking them for their email, giving them timeframes that you do monitor the inbox, and during those times, giving them a time frame that when you'll come back to them. In the meantime, you could suggest that they go through a list of things in order to answer their question. Firstly, asking their child for any further clarification. That's that outsource to the students that we talked about before. Look on Aspire. Receive class updates on, for instance, if you want to consider Class Dojo, or book in a time to speak with me here. And there's the Calendly link you could put them in. You could also then, these are just suggestions, but refer to this or contact this person or inquire here, so that they can at least feel self-empowered to try and problem solve themselves. And the likelihood or need that they will have not been able to solve it, at least in or their question or query in the 48 hours, means that they'd probably already potentially come back to you with, oh, I've sorted it out, I've got it, don't worry. Just helps to really set your own boundaries and remove some of that urgency and immediacy that can come sometimes with parents, giving them something to work through. Helps them to feel also empowered, but also in control, which we know will help their well-being too. So we'll ask that you please grab your worksheet and, considering what we've just spoken about, write down some ideas as to how you could automate communication with parents in order to set those clear boundaries for yourself. And finally, discuss as our third strategy, which is really about moving away the conversation to the way that they may be coming to you and putting it into a more structured way to have an interaction with them. So recall that parental involvement is actually good. It's helpful to have them involved in their child's educational process and experience, whether that be including talking about class activities or school activities, different aspirations, supervising how they can help with homework and contacting them. So discussions and understanding the parent and their involvement is always advantageous from a child's perspective. Discussing moving away can look like a classroom note, which could be seen by the student as well, and that may be important for them to be across the details of too. A quick email, a class-wide newsletter, for instance, or considering those tools that we've looked at before, so Aspire, Class Dojo, Parent Teacher Night Info, etc. So as a structured way to discuss, something to consider is two-way feedback. So research has found that clear written and verbal feedback on students' behaviour is effective. So making sure that you're writing down and reflecting on those observed classroom behaviours, for instance, is excellent when giving the feedback. Even better than that is, yes, having that clear written and verbal feedback on the student, but also asking about what the parents' feedback may be for you and your strategies in place as well. That can be far more advantageous for that two-way process to occur. So what can this really look like? It is about monitoring the classrooms and what's happening, recording those observed behaviours, and preparing that written feedback to deliver. You can, in the process, ask parents as well for feedback as well and what's their input on how the student's going, and their input that way, but also feedback for you directly as to how do you think I can help this situation, or what do you think could be your role in it, in that too. So it really is a two-way and collaborative approach. You can then go away and reflect upon that feedback and adjust accordingly if need be. So finally, I will ask you to again, please bring out your worksheet and thinking about this discussion strategy and also two-way feedback. Think about how you can facilitate one strategy perhaps to have more of that feedback with parents. So to summarise today, hopefully you've learnt that boundary setting with parents is really important for teachers because you are feeling, according to the research, increasingly disrespected, underappreciated and abused by parents. And the boundaries also between work and home life are becoming blurred. You can set boundaries though with teachers by firstly relating to them and facilitating that more authoritative parenting style, outsourcing to students and parents, but also automating your communication by using different tools such as Aspire, Class Dojo, Calendly, and setting up, I suggest, an auto reply email. And finally, discussing with parents in a more structured way, and particularly in that two-way feedback method. As always, some resources for you. Here are your emergency contacts. You also have access to Maximize for a term using the promo code KRB 2024. And finally, here are my contact details if you do have any further questions, comments, feedback for me. Hopefully you did scan that QR code earlier, so I would ask if you can please complete that. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.